The blood-soaked bandana around Pierce Yates's torso had long since turned from crimson to rust brown by the time his horse staggered into Willow Creek, Texas. The late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the dusty Main Street. The year was 1876, and the West was still wild enough that a man could bleed to death in the saddle without anyone batting an eye, unless that man happened to collapse right in front of Dr. Delilah Reynolds' medical office. Delilah had been locking up for the evening when she heard the hollow thud of a body hitting dirt outside her door. She'd seen enough wounded men in her 4 years as Willow Creek's only physician to know that sound anywhere. The door swung open with a creak as she stepped out onto the wooden porch, her green eyes widening at the sight of the fallen stranger. "My God," she whispered, hitching up her skirts as she rushed down the steps. The man's horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, was heaving with exhaustion, foam flecking its muzzle. But it was the rider who commanded her attention. Broad-shouldered, with sand-colored hair matted with sweat and dirt, he lay face down in the street, one hand still clutching his side. Delilah knelt beside him, unmindful of the dust staining her blue cotton dress. Gently, she rolled him onto his back, noting the pallor of his tanned face beneath several days' worth of stubble. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of a summer storm. "Don't touch me," he growled, his voice little more than a rasp. He tried to push her hands away but lacked the strength. "I don't need a woman's help." "Clearly," Delilah said dryly, already assessing his injuries. "That's why you're bleeding all over my doorstep, Mr. Yates," he managed. "Pierce Yates. And I said," he winced as she probed near the wound. "Leave it be." Delilah sat back on her heels, studying him. Men like him weren't uncommon in these parts, too proud to accept help, especially from a woman. But the stubborn set of his jaw told her this one might be more obstinate than most. "Mr. Yates, you have what appears to be a bullet wound that's festering. Without proper treatment, you'll be dead by morning." His eyes, though glazed with pain, held a flicker of amusement. "Been dead before, madam. Didn't take." Sheriff Thomas Wilson's boots scuffed the dirt as he approached, his shadow falling over them both. "Trouble, Doc," Delilah glanced up. "Just a patient who doesn't know what's good for him." "I know you," the sheriff said, squinting down at Pierce. "You're that bounty hunter from El Paso, the one they call the Ghost." Pierce's hand moved toward his hip where his revolver would have been, but the holster was empty. "Just passing through," he muttered. "With a bullet in your side." Wilson's hand rested on his own pistol. "Who put it there, Yates?" "None of your concern, lawman," Pierce said, attempting to sit up. Delilah placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "The only place you're going is my surgery, Mr. Yates." She turned to Wilson. "Sheriff, I could use your help getting him inside." "I said no," Pierce protested, even as his eyes began to roll back in his head. "Then I'll wait till you're ready to heal," Delilah said, her voice softer now but no less determined. "But I won't watch a man die on my doorstep when I can do something about it." The last thing Pierce saw before darkness claimed him was the determined set of Delilah Reynolds' chin and the surprising gentleness of her hands as she checked his pulse. When he awoke, it was to the distant sound of rainfall on a tin roof and the closer presence of someone moving quietly around the room. Pierce kept his eyes closed, taking stock. He was lying on something soft, a proper bed, not the hard ground he'd grown accustomed to. His side throbbed dully, but the fiery pain had subsided to a manageable ache. "I know you're awake," came a woman's voice. "Your breathing changed." Pierce opened his eyes to see Dr. Reynolds sitting in a chair beside the bed, a book open in her lap. The lantern light caught in her chestnut hair, pulled back in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. "How long?" he asked, his throat dry as sandpaper. She closed her book and reached for a water glass on the bedside table. 3 days. You've been in and out of consciousness with fever. Helping him lift his head, she held the glass to his lips. Drink slowly. The water was cool and sweet. Pierce drank deeply before sinking back against the pillows. You should have left me. Is that gratitude I hear? Delilah set the glass down with a decisive click. The bullet nicked your liver. Had I left you, as you so eloquently put it, you would be occupying a pine box in our cemetery right now. Pierce glanced around the room. It was small but tidy, with medical texts lining a bookshelf and a desk covered in papers. This isn't a hospital. Willow Creek doesn't have one. This is my home. My surgery is downstairs. She stood and moved to check the bandages at his side. Who shot you, Mr. Yates? Doesn't matter. Her fingers were cool and professional against his skin. It does if they come looking to finish the job. Pierce caught her wrist, surprised at how delicate it felt in his grasp. Don't concern yourself, doctor. My problems aren't yours. Delilah met his gaze steadily. When those problems bleed all over my doorstep, they become mine. She gently extricated her wrist from his grip. Rest now. We can discuss your stubborn refusal of help when you're stronger. I'm not staying, Pierce insisted, even as his eyelids grew heavy. Of course not, she agreed, but there was a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. You're free to leave anytime. Just as soon as you can stand without reopening that wound. As darkness claimed him again, Pierce had the distinct feeling he'd just lost a battle he hadn't even known he was fighting. The next time he woke, sunlight was streaming through the window. Pierce was alone in the room, but he could hear voices from below. Dr. Reynolds speaking with someone, their words indistinct through the floorboards. Moving cautiously, he pushed himself to a sitting position, gritting his teeth against the pain that flared in his side. His clothes were nowhere to be seen, but a clean shirt had been draped over the back of a chair. Pierce swung his legs over the side of the bed, the room tilting alarmingly for a moment before steadying. The shirt, clearly borrowed from someone larger than the petite doctor, slipped on easily enough, but standing proved to be another matter entirely. His legs buckled almost immediately, sending him crashing to the floor with a muffled curse. Footsteps hurried up the stairs, and then the door flew open to reveal Delilah, her face flushed with exertion and exasperation. I see you're feeling better, she said, crossing to help him. Enough to ignore medical advice, at least. I need to go, Pierce grunted, reluctantly accepting her shoulder as support to get back to the bed. There are men looking for me. There are men looking for most people in these parts, Delilah replied, easing him back against the pillows. What makes yours special? Pierce studied her, trying to determine how much to reveal. There was something disarming about her directness, the way she looked at him as if he were simply a man, not the legend that had grown around his name. I'm a bounty hunter, he said finally. I track men for money. I gathered as much from Sheriff Wilson. What I'm asking is why someone tried to kill you. Pierce sighed, running a hand through his hair. I brought in Jesse Blackburn 3 weeks ago, caught him trying to flee to Mexico after robbing the First National Bank in El Paso. His brothers weren't too pleased. And they shot you, Delilah's brow furrowed. Here in Willow Creek. No, about 20 miles south. I've been riding for 2 days with their bullet in me. He leaned back, suddenly exhausted. They'll have tracked me here by now. Delilah's expression remained calm, but he saw the slight tightening of her jaw. Sheriff Wilson should know. Sheriff Wilson couldn't stop a runny nose, much less the Blackburn brothers. Then what do you suggest? She folded her arms across her chest. Because I won't have gunfire in my town if I can help it. Pierce nearly smiled at her fierce protectiveness of a place that likely wasn't even her hometown. As soon as I can ride, I'll lead them away from here. That won't be for at least another week, Delilah said firmly. And even then, you'll be in no condition for a chase or a gunfight. I don't have a week, doctor. Then I suppose we'll have to find another solution. She straightened her apron with a brisk motion. For now, you need to eat. I'll bring up some broth. Pierce watched her go, bemused by her matter-of-fact approach to what was essentially a death sentence for anyone caught in the Blackburn's path. He'd been chasing dangerous men for 6 years, ever since returning from the war to find his family's ranch burned to the ground. He knew what men like the Blackburns were capable of. The thought of bringing that kind of violence to this woman's doorstep didn't sit well with him. She'd already saved his life. He wouldn't repay that debt by endangering hers. When Delilah returned with a tray bearing a bowl of steaming broth and fresh bread, Pierce had made up his mind. He'd eat, he'd rest, and then he'd slip away under cover of darkness, wound be damned. I hope you're not planning anything foolish, Delilah said, setting the tray across his lap. Pierce raised an eyebrow. Like what? Like trying to leave before you're healed. She sat in the chair beside the bed, watching as he took a cautious sip of the broth. I've seen that look before on soldiers too stubborn to know what's good for them. You worked with the army. Pierce asked, genuinely curious. A shadow crossed her face. During the war. My father was a surgeon with the Union forces. I assisted him from the time I was 16. That explained her competence, Pierce thought. Too many so-called doctors out here had learned their trade from reading a single outdated medical book, or worse, from watching horse doctors. Delilah Reynolds clearly knew what she was doing. How did you end up in Willow Creek? He asked, breaking off a piece of bread. My father died 2 years after the war ended. Consumption. Her voice was steady, but Pierce could see the old grief in her eyes. I had my training but no practice of my own. Willow Creek needed a doctor and I needed a fresh start. They accepted a woman doctor just like that. Delilah's smile was wry. Not just like that, no. The first year was challenging, but eventually people care less about what's proper when they're bleeding or their child is burning with fever. Pierce nodded, understanding. The West had a way of stripping away pretenses. Out here, what a person could do mattered far more than who they were supposed to be. And you, Delilah asked, how does one become a bounty hunter? By being good at finding people who don't want to be found. Pierce set his spoon down, his appetite fading as memories surfaced. After the war, there wasn't much left of the world I knew. Hunting bounties seemed as good a way as any to use the skills I'd learned. That explains the profession, not the choice, Delilah pressed gently. Pierce met her gaze, surprised at his own willingness to answer. Some men deserve to be found. Something in his tone must have warned her not to probe further, because Delilah simply nodded and stood to take the tray. Rest now. I have patients to see this afternoon, but I'll check on you later. After she left, Pierce lay back, listening to the sounds of the small town drifting through the open window, horses and wagons passing by, snippets of conversation, a dog barking in the distance. It had been a long time since he'd stayed in one place long enough to notice such things. Despite his determination to leave, his body had other ideas. The meal and the lingering effects of his injury soon pulled him back into sleep, where he dreamed of riding endlessly across open country, always pursued, never finding refuge. He woke with a start to find the room in shadows and a figure seated beside the bed. Easy, came Delilah's voice. You were having a nightmare. Pierce realized he was drenched in sweat, his heart hammering in his chest. What time is it? Just past sundown. She placed a cool hand on his forehead. Your fever's back. I need to change your bandages. He submitted to her ministrations, too weak to protest as she unwrapped the dressing at his side. Even in the dim lamplight, he could see her frown as she examined the wound. "It's infected again," she said, reaching for clean bandages and a bottle from her medical bag. "This is going to hurt." Pierce clenched his jaw as she cleaned the wound with something that burned like fire. "I've had worse," he managed. "I don't doubt it," Delilah replied, her touch gentle despite the necessary pain she was inflicting. "You have more scars than any man your age should. Hazard of the profession." She glanced up at him, her hands pausing in their work. "Is it worth it, hunting men for money?" The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that in a long time, perhaps because they assumed the answer, or perhaps because no one had cared enough to wonder. "Sometimes," he said finally, "when the man I'm hunting has hurt innocent people. When bringing him in means justice for someone who wouldn't get it otherwise." Delilah resumed her work, applying a salve to the wound before wrapping it with fresh bandages. "And the rest of the time, it's just a job," Pierce admitted. "A way to keep moving." "What are you running from, Mr. Yates?" The question was soft, without judgment. Pierce closed his eyes, unwilling to see the compassion in hers. "Nothing that can be outrun, Doctor." She finished tying off the bandage and pulled his shirt back down. "There's water and laudanum on the table if the pain gets bad. Try to sleep." "Doctor," Pierce called as she reached the door. "Thank you." Delilah paused, her silhouette outlined against the hallway light. "You're welcome, Mr. Yates." As the door closed behind her, Pierce realized that for the first time in years, he didn't want to run. And that thought frightened him more than any bounty or bullet ever had. The next morning brought no relief from the fever. Pierce drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only vaguely of Delilah's presence as she changed compresses on his forehead and coaxed water between his parched lips. Sometimes he thought he heard her talking to him, her voice a soothing murmur that anchored him when the fever dreams threatened to sweep him away. It was twilight when he finally surfaced to full awareness. The room was quiet except for the scratch of a pen on paper. Turning his head, Pierce saw Delilah at the small desk, writing in what appeared to be a journal. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough. Delilah looked up, relief evident in her face. "And you're finally lucid. How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo." He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. "Don't." She crossed to the bed, helping him ease back against the pillows. "The infection's been stubborn. How long this time?" "Another 2 days." Delilah poured water into a cup and helped him drink. "Your fever broke about an hour ago." Pierce frowned. "You've been here the whole time." "Not the whole time. Mrs. Abernathy sat with you when I had patients." She set the cup down. "But yes, mostly." The thought of this woman, practically a stranger, keeping vigil at his bedside was unsettling. Pierce wasn't used to being cared for, not since his mother had died when he was 14. "You shouldn't have troubled yourself," he said gruffly. Delilah's eyebrows rose. "Would you prefer I had let you die?" "No, but then don't tell me how to practice medicine, Mr. Yates." There was a hint of steel beneath her professional tone. "Saving lives is my job, just as hunting men is yours." Pierce found himself wanting to smile at her spirited defense. "Fair enough, Doctor." Delilah's expression softened. "You should eat something. I'll bring up some soup for Mrs. Chen's restaurant. Her chicken soup has brought back more patients from the brink than any medicine I possess." As she turned to go, Pierce caught her wrist. "Have there been any strangers in town? Men asking questions?" She hesitated just long enough to confirm his fears. "Sheriff Wilson has been keeping an eye out. No one matching the Blackburn's description has been seen." "But someone has been asking about me," he pressed. Delilah sighed. "A man stopped by the saloon 2 days ago. He claimed to be looking for his cousin, a man matching your description." "Samuel Jenkins told him you weren't here." "Jenkins lied for me," The blacksmith. This may surprise you, Mr. Yates, but Willow Creek looks after its own. Pierce released her wrist, bemused. I'm not one of its own. You are as long as you're under my care, Delilah said simply. Now rest. I'll be back with that soup. After she left, Pierce stared at the ceiling, turning her words over in his mind. It had been a long time since he'd belonged anywhere or to anyone. The thought was as tempting as it was dangerous. When Delilah returned with the promised soup, she also brought news. Sheriff Wilson spotted 2 men watching the town from the ridge to the north, she said, setting the tray on his lap. They haven't approached yet, but he thinks they might be the Blackburns. Pierce set his spoon down. I need my guns. You need to heal, Delilah countered. Besides, Sheriff Wilson has deputized several men. The town is prepared. You don't understand what these men are capable of, Pierce insisted. I've tracked the Blackburns across 3 territories. They don't care who gets hurt as long as they get what they want. And what do they want? Me. Dead. He pushed the tray aside. Where are my clothes, Doctor, my weapons? Delilah crossed her arms. You can barely sit up, let alone face down 2 gunmen. If you walk out that door, you'll be dead before you reach the street. Better me than innocent townspeople. And what makes your life worth less than theirs? She demanded. The question struck him like a physical blow. Pierce had been placing himself between danger and others for so long that he'd stopped considering his own worth in the equation. It's not about worth, he said finally. It's about responsibility. Those men are here because of me. Then we'll face them together, Delilah said firmly. As a town, that's what communities do, Mr. Yates. They stand together against threats. Pierce studied her, this woman who had saved his life and was now prepared to risk her own to protect him. Why do you care what happens to me, Doctor? Delilah's cheeks flushed slightly, but she held his gaze. Because every life matters. Even the ones belonging to stubborn, ungrateful bounty hunters who refuse help. Despite everything, Pierce found himself smiling, a rusty, unpracticed expression that felt foreign on his face. I've been called worse. I don't doubt it. She pushed the tray back toward him. Now eat your soup. If you're determined to get yourself killed, you might as well do it on a full stomach. As Pierce reluctantly picked up his spoon, he realized that for the first time in years, someone was fighting for him rather than against him. The feeling was as strange as it was unexpectedly welcome. Over the next few days, a tense vigil fell over Willow Creek. The Blackburn brothers had made camp just beyond the ridge, visible enough to be a threat but too distant for the sheriff to confront them without leaving the town vulnerable. It was a waiting game, and everyone knew it. Pierce's strength returned gradually. Under Delilah's care, the wound began to heal properly, the infection receding. She still refused to return his guns, but she did bring his clothes, freshly washed and mended. Small steps, Mr. Yates, she said when he protested the continued confiscation of his weapons. When you can walk the length of the hallway without turning white as a sheet, we'll discuss arming you. On the 5th day after the Blackburns' arrival, Pierce was sitting in a chair by the window, watching the town go about its business with a wary normality, when the door opened to admit not Delilah but Sheriff Wilson. Yates, the lawman nodded, removing his hat. Doc says you're improving. Sheriff, Pierce gestured to the other chair. What brings you up here? Wilson sat, his weathered face grave. The Blackburns sent a message. They want to talk. To who? To you. Wilson leaned forward, elbows on his knees. They rode into town this morning, bold as brass. Said they just want to talk to their old friend Pierce Yates. Said if you come out and meet them at noon tomorrow, they'll leave the town be. Pierce's jaw tightened. And you believe them? Not for a second. Wilson scratched his graying beard. But folks are getting nervous. We can't sit here under siege forever. So you want to hand me over? I didn't say that. the sheriff said sharply. "I'm just telling you how things stand." Pierce nodded, understanding the unspoken message. Wilson wasn't betraying him, but the sheriff had a responsibility to the town. "I'll be ready by noon tomorrow. Doc won't like it." "Dr. Reynolds doesn't have a say in the matter," Pierce said, more harshly than he intended. Wilson stood, settling his hat back on his head. "You might be surprised. That woman's got more spine than most men I know." He moved to the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Yates, I think you're doing the right thing, but don't underestimate them or yourself." After the sheriff left, Pierce rose carefully and made his way to the dresser where he knew Delilah kept her father's service revolver. He wouldn't face the Blackburns unarmed, even if it meant taking something that didn't belong to him. The drawer slid open easily, revealing the gleaming Colt nestled in a worn leather holster. As Pierce reached for it, the door opened. "I see Sheriff Wilson delivered his message," Delilah said, her voice tight with controlled anger. She looked from the open drawer to Pierce's face. "And you've made your decision." Pierce straightened, not bothering to deny it. "I have to face them. In your condition." She closed the door with more force than necessary. "It would be suicide. Maybe. But it's my choice to make." Delilah's eyes flashed. "Not when you've spent a week under my care. Not when I've fought to save your life only for you to throw it away out of some misguided sense of honor." "It's not about honor," Pierce insisted. "It's about ending this before anyone else gets hurt." "And what about you?" she demanded, crossing the room to stand before him. "Does it matter to you at all that you'll be hurt, that you'll likely die?" Pierce looked down at her, struck again by the fierce care in her eyes. "Why does it matter so much to you, Delilah?" It was the first time he'd used her given name, and she blinked in surprise before recovering. "Because I've seen too many men die for foolish reasons. Because every life has value." She hesitated, then added more softly, "Because in just a week, I've come to care what happens to you, Pierce Yates." The admission hung between them, fragile and unexpected. Pierce found himself wanting to reach for her, to trace the stubborn line of her jaw with his fingers. Instead, he stepped back, creating distance between them. "Then understand that I'm doing this to protect the people I care about," he said quietly. "Including you." Delilah shook her head, disappointment evident in every line of her body. "If you're determined to do this, I won't stop you. But I won't help you die either." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Your guns are in the cabinet in my surgery. The key is in the top desk drawer." When she was gone, Pierce sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the borrowed revolver still in his hand. He hadn't expected to find something worth living for in this dusty little town, just when circumstances demanded he be ready to die. That night, as Pierce cleaned his revolvers by lamplight, preparing for what might be his last confrontation, there was a soft knock at the door. He slid one gun beneath the pillow before calling, "Enter." It was Delilah, carrying a small bundle. Her expression was resolute as she approached the bed and set the package beside him. Clean bandages, laudanum for the pain, a flask of whiskey for courage, or disinfectant, whichever you need more. Pierce stared at her, touched by the gesture despite her obvious disapproval. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," she said stiffly. "Just promise me you won't face them alone. The sheriff isn't at full strength either. He took a fall from his horse last month and his shoulder still pains him." Delilah sat on the edge of the chair, her back straight as a ramrod. "The Blackburn brothers won't play fair. They'll have men positioned around the town." Pierce narrowed his eyes. "How do you know that?" "Because I've lived through a war, Mr. Yates. I've seen how men fight when they have nothing to lose." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Let the townspeople help. Jenkins, Howard at the livery, even old Mr. Peterson, they all have rifles and know how to use them." The thought of involving the townspeople still didn't sit right with Pierce. This is my fight. It became our fight when the Blackburns decided to terrorize our town, Delilah insisted. Please, Pierce, don't face this alone out of pride or some misplaced sense of protection. The way she said his name soft but insistent undid something in him. Pierce set the gun down and reached for her hand, surprising them both. Her fingers were cool and slim in his calloused palm. I've been alone a long time, Delilah, he said quietly. It's safer that way. Safer isn't always better. She turned her hand in his, returning his grip. Sometimes the greatest risk is never letting anyone close enough to matter. Pierce looked down at their joined hands, feeling a connection that went beyond doctor and patient, beyond the circumstantial alliance they'd formed. If I survive tomorrow, maybe we can discuss that further. A smile touched her lips for the first time that evening. I'll hold you to that, Mr. Yates. When she left, Pierce continued his preparations with a renewed sense of purpose. He might have come to Willow Creek alone and wounded, but he wouldn't face tomorrow's confrontation that way. For the first time in years, he had someone to come back to, and that made all the difference. Morning dawned clear and cold, the October air carrying the first hint of the winter to come. Pierce dressed carefully, mindful of his still healing wound. His gun belt felt heavier than usual as he buckled it around his hips, checking the action on both revolvers before sliding them into their holsters. When he descended the stairs to Delilah's surgery, he found not just the doctor waiting, but Sheriff Wilson, the blacksmith Jenkins, and several other townsmen. "What's this?" Pierce asked, pausing on the bottom step. "Your backup," Wilson said simply, checking his pocket watch. "We've got an hour before noon. Thought we might discuss strategy." Pierce looked at Delilah, who met his gaze steadily. "I told you, Mr. Yates, Willow Creek looks after its own." For the next 45 minutes they outlined a plan. The Blackburns would expect Pierce to meet them in the street, as per their demand. But Wilson and Jenkins would be positioned on the roof of the general store, while Howard and Peterson covered the saloon side of the street. The remainder of the men would ensure no Blackburn allies could flank them from the side streets. "And what about you, Doctor?" Pierce asked as the men filed out to take their positions. "Where will you be?" "In my surgery, preparing to treat whoever needs it," Delilah replied. She hesitated, then added, "Please try not to be among them." Pierce found himself reaching for her hand again, the gesture becoming dangerously familiar. "I'll do my best." Delilah squeezed his fingers once before releasing them. "I meant what I said before. You're not alone in this." "I'm beginning to understand that," Pierce said, the realization both comforting and terrifying. As the church bell began to toll the noon hour, Pierce stepped out onto the porch of Delilah's office. The main street of Willow Creek stretched before him, empty save for two riders approaching from the south end. The Blackburn brothers, right on time. Pierce walked to the middle of the street, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. His side ached, but the pain was manageable. He stopped, feet planted shoulder-width apart, and waited. The Blackburns reined in about 20 paces away. Luke, the elder, was a big man with a bushy beard and cold eyes. Jed was leaner, with the twitchy demeanor of a man too familiar with violence. "Yates," Luke called, his voice carrying down the empty street. "You're looking well for a man who took a bullet." "Sorry to disappoint," Pierce replied, keeping his hands loose at his sides, ready to draw if necessary. "Oh, we ain't disappointed," Jed said with a grin that showed tobacco-stained teeth. "Just means we get to kill you proper, 'stead of letting you bleed out in the dirt." "Your brother chose his path," Pierce said evenly. "He robbed that bank knowing the consequences." Luke's face darkened. "The consequence wasn't supposed to be a noose." "That's the law," Pierce said. "He killed a teller during the robbery." "And now we're going to kill you," Luke declared, his hand moving toward his gun. Pierce tensed, ready to draw, when a shot rang out not from the Blackburns, but from behind them. A third rider had appeared at the end of the street, his rifle already raised for a second shot. In the chaos that followed, Pierce dove to the side, drawing and firing in one fluid motion despite the pain that tore through his wound. Luke Blackburn jerked in his saddle as Pierce's bullet caught him in the chest. Jed managed to get a shot off, the bullet splintering the hitching post beside Pierce. From the rooftops, Wilson and Jenkins opened fire on the third man, while Pierce rolled behind a water trough, coming up on one knee to take aim at Jed. The younger Blackburn had dismounted and was using his horse as cover, returning fire with the practiced ease of a man who had killed before. The gunfight seemed to last an eternity, though it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. When the smoke cleared, Luke Blackburn lay dead in the street, and the third man one of their gang, Pierce assumed, was slumped over his saddle, his horse having bolted to the edge of town. Jed was wounded but still dangerous, crouched behind a barrel outside the feed store. Pierce could see the blood staining his left sleeve, but the man's gun hand was steady. "It's over, Blackburn," Pierce called. "Your brother's dead. Surrender now and you'll get a fair trial." "Like Jesse did," Jed shouted back, his voice raw with grief and rage. "They didn't even wait a week before they strung him up. He confessed to killing that teller," Pierce replied, keeping his gun trained on the barrel. "You don't have to die today, Jed. Rather die than rot in prison." Jed's voice had taken on a desperate edge that Pierce recognized all too well, the sound of a man with nothing left to lose. Before Pierce could respond, Jed burst from behind the barrel, gun blazing. Pierce fired twice, his bullets finding their mark even as Jed's shot went wide. The younger Blackburn staggered, then fell face forward into the dirt, his gun still clutched in his hand. Silence fell over the street. Pierce stayed where he was, scanning for any sign of additional threats. When none appeared, he slowly got to his feet, wincing as fresh blood seeped through his shirt from his reopened wound. Sheriff Wilson approached, his rifle still at the ready. "You hit, old wound," Pierce said, pressing his hand to his side. "The third man, dead," Wilson confirmed. "Jenkins got him with a clean shot." The sheriff surveyed the street, where the bodies of the Blackburn brothers lay. "It's over, Yates." Pierce nodded, feeling a curious mixture of relief and emptiness. The threat was gone, but so was his reason for staying in Willow Creek. He didn't get to finish the thought before his knees buckled. Wilson caught him before he hit the ground, cursing under his breath. "Jenkins, help me get him to the docks." The world tilted and swam around Pierce as they half carried him back to Delilah's surgery. He was vaguely aware of her voice, sharp with concern, and then the familiar feel of her examination table beneath him. "What happened?" she demanded, cutting away his blood-soaked shirt. "Wound reopened," Wilson explained, "but he got both Blackburns." Pierce tried to focus on Delilah's face as she bent over him, her expression a mixture of worry and exasperation. "I told you," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Told me what?" she asked, pressing a clean cloth to his side. "That I'd try not to end up back on your table." He attempted a smile, but it felt more like a grimace. "Sorry. Don't you dare apologize for being alive, Pierce Yates," Delilah said fiercely. "Now lie still and let me work." As the laudanum took effect and darkness closed in around him, Pierce thought he felt the brush of lips against his forehead and heard soft words that might have been, "Don't leave me now." But he couldn't be sure if it was real or just another fever dream. Recovery the second time was slower, more deliberate. Pierce's body, already weakened from the first wound and subsequent infection, struggled to heal this new damage. For 3 days, He drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of Delilah's constant presence, her touch gentle but sure as she changed bandages and coaxed water or broth between his lips. On the fourth day, he woke with a clear head to find her dozing in the chair beside his bed, her head pillowed on her arms at the edge of the mattress. In sleep, the worry lines between her brows had smoothed out, making her look younger, more vulnerable. Her chestnut hair had come partially loose from its pins, falling in soft waves around her face. Pierce found himself wanting to touch it, to see if it felt as silky as it looked. The thought startled him with its intimacy. He had admired women before, had even loved once, long ago before the war. But this feeling, this tender ache in his chest as he watched Delilah sleep, was something altogether different. As if sensing his gaze, she stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment before she fully woke, her expression was soft, unguarded. Then awareness returned, and with it the professional mask she wore. "You're awake," she said, straightening in her chair and smoothing her hair back. "How do you feel?" "Better," Pierce replied honestly. "Thanks to you." "You reopened the wound and lost a significant amount of blood," Delilah said, her tone matter of fact as she reached to check his pulse. "I had to restitch it. You'll have a more prominent scar now. One more won't make much difference." Pierce caught her hand as she withdrew it. "Delilah, I don't," she interrupted, her voice suddenly tight. "Don't thank me for doing my job." Pierce held her gaze, trying to understand the emotion he saw there. "That's not what I was going to say." "Then what?" she asked, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "I was going to say I'm sorry for putting you through this again, for being a difficult patient." Delilah's expression softened slightly. "You're not the most difficult patient I've had, Mr. Yates, just the most stubborn." "Pierce," he corrected gently. "After everything, I think you can use my given name." A small smile touched her lips. "Pierce, then." "The Blackburns," he said, releasing her hand. "They're definitely dead," Delilah confirmed. "Sheriff Wilson had them buried 2 days ago. The third man, too." Pierce nodded, absorbing this. "Then it's over." "Yes." She studied him for a moment. "What happens now?" It was the question he'd been avoiding since waking. With the Blackburns dead, there was no reason for him to stay in Willow Creek. He should move on, find another bounty to hunt, another town to pass through. But the thought held no appeal. For the first time in years, Pierce found himself wanting to stay put, to see what might grow in the space between himself and this remarkable woman who had saved his life not once, but twice. "I don't know," he admitted. "I haven't stayed in one place for more than a few weeks since the war ended." "And now?" Delilah prompted, her expression carefully neutral. Pierce looked around the room that had been his world for the past 2 weeks. "Now I'm thinking maybe it's time to stop running." Delilah's breath caught, but she quickly composed herself. "Willow Creek could use a man with your skills. Sheriff Wilson mentioned he's been wanting a deputy." "A lawman." Pierce considered the idea. "I've spent a lot of time on the other side of that line." "Hunting men who broke the law," Delilah pointed out. "That's not so different from enforcing it." "Maybe not," Pierce conceded. "But I don't know if I'm cut out for settling down." Delilah stood, smoothing her skirts with a brisk motion. "Well, you have time to think about it. You won't be fit to ride for at least another 2 weeks." As she turned to go, Pierce called after her, "Would it matter to you if I stayed?" Delilah paused at the door, her back to him. For a long moment she was silent, and Pierce thought she might not answer. Then, without turning, she said softly, "Yes, Pierce. It would matter to me." Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving him with the weight of her words and the sudden, startling realization that for the first time in years, his future felt like more than just an extension of his past. The following days established a new routine. Pierce grew strong enough to move downstairs to a small room off the surgery that Delilah used for patients who needed overnight observation. As his strength returned, he began taking short walks through the town, reacquainting himself with a kind of normal life he had almost forgotten. The people of Willow Creek treated him with a mixture of respect and cautious friendliness. Word of the gunfight with the Blackburns had spread, and in the telling and retelling, Pierce had become something of a local hero. It was a strange feeling for a man used to moving like a shadow through other people's lives. Sheriff Wilson made good on his offer of a deputy position, presenting it formally one evening as they sat on the porch of Delilah's office, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and gold. Town council approved it unanimously, Wilson said, handing Pierce a deputy's badge. Pays not much, but it comes with room and board at the boarding house, and folks around here respect the law. Pierce turned the badge over in his hand, feeling the weight of it both physically and symbolically. I appreciate the offer, Sheriff, but I need more time to think about it. Wilson nodded, understanding in his weathered face. Take all the time you need. Offer stands. He glanced toward the door where Delilah could be seen through the window, organizing her medical supplies. Though I reckon your decision might have more to do with our good doctor than with the job itself. Pierce didn't deny it. Since their conversation about him staying, he and Delilah had developed a careful dance around each other, friendly but reserved, neither one willing to acknowledge the growing tension between them. They took meals together, talked about the town and its people, even played chess in the evenings when her work was done. But neither had broached the subject of what might happen when Pierce was fully healed. It's complicated, Pierce said finally. Wilson chuckled. Ain't it always with the good ones? He stood, settling his hat on his head. Just don't wait too long to figure it out, Yates. Some opportunities don't come around twice. After the sheriff left, Pierce remained on the porch, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The door opened behind him and Delilah stepped out, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. Mind if I join you? She asked, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. Pierce shifted to make room for her on the bench. Not at all. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, listening to the night sounds of the small town distant piano music from the saloon, the occasional whinny of a horse, laughter from the restaurant down the street. Wilson offered me the deputy position, Pierce said finally. Officially. Delilah glanced at him, her profile illuminated by the lamp hanging beside the door. And what did you say? That I needed time to think. She nodded, turning her gaze back to the street. That's understandable. It would be a significant change from your previous life. Pierce studied her face, wishing he could read what she was thinking. Would it be a good change, do you think? I can't answer that for you, Delilah said carefully. Only you know what you want, Pierce. That's just it, he admitted, surprising himself with his candor. I'm not sure I know anymore. For years, all I wanted was to keep moving to find the next bounty, the next town, but now, she prompted when he trailed off. Pierce turned toward her, his decision made in that moment. Now I find myself wanting to stay, here, in Willow Creek. Delilah's breath caught, but she kept her composure. Because of the deputy position? No, Pierce said honestly. Because of you. The admission hung between them, fragile and momentous. Delilah's eyes widened, and in them, Pierce could see a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Pierce, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want you to stay because you feel obligated or grateful. It's not obligation, he interrupted gently. And it's more than gratitude, though I do owe you my life twice over. Pierce reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. I want to stay because for the first time in years, I've found someone worth staying for. Delilah looked down at their joined hands, her thumb tracing a small circle on his palm. "I've spent 4 years building a life here, becoming the doctor this town needs. I can't leave." "I'm not asking you to," Pierce said, suddenly realizing that's what she had thought. "I'm asking if there might be room in that life for me." She looked up then, her eyes meeting his with a directness that was uniquely Delilah. "There has been since the day you collapsed on my doorstep. I just never thought you'd want to claim it." The simplicity of her admission, the quiet certainty in her voice, undid the last of Pierce's hesitation. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, a beginning rather than a culmination. When he drew back, Delilah's eyes remained closed for a moment, her lips curved in a small smile. "Is that a yes to the deputy position?" she asked, opening her eyes to reveal a teasing light in their depths. Pierce laughed, the sound surprising them both with its ease. "It's a yes to staying. The badge is just a bonus." Delilah's smile widened, transforming her face in a way that made Pierce's heart skip. "Then welcome to Willow Creek, Deputy Yates." As they sat together on the porch, hands still joined, Pierce felt something settle within him, a sense of rightness, of coming home, that had eluded him for longer than he could remember. He had come to this town wounded and alone, determined to refuse help from anyone, especially a strong-willed female doctor. But Delilah Reynolds had seen past his defenses, had waited patiently for him to be ready to heal, not just physically, but in all the ways that mattered. And now, watching the stars appear over a town that might become his home, Pierce Yates found himself grateful for the bullet that had brought him to her door. The days stretched into weeks, and Pierce settled into his new role as deputy with a naturalness that surprised him. The badge felt right pinned to his vest, the responsibility of maintaining order in Willow Creek, a purpose he embraced wholeheartedly. Sheriff Wilson proved to be a fair and capable mentor, teaching Pierce the subtleties of law enforcement that differed from bounty hunting. "Bringing in a wanted man is one thing," Wilson explained as they patrolled the quiet streets one afternoon. "Keeping the peace among folks you see every day is another beast entirely." Pierce nodded, understanding. As a bounty hunter, he'd been a visitor everywhere, accountable to no one but himself and the law. Now, his actions reflected on Willow Creek and its people he was beginning to care about. His relationship with Delilah blossomed cautiously, both of them navigating unfamiliar territory. They maintained professional boundaries during the day, he the deputy, she the town doctor, but in the evenings, they allowed themselves to explore the growing feelings between them. Their courtship, as the town ladies called it with knowing smiles, was the subject of much approving gossip. Pierce found the attention uncomfortable at first, but gradually came to accept it as part of small-town life. Delilah handled it with the same grace she applied to everything, neither confirming nor denying the speculation but treating Pierce with a warmth that left little doubt about her feelings. One crisp November evening, a month after Pierce had officially accepted the deputy position, they sat before the fire in Delilah's parlor. Outside, the first snow of the season was falling, blanketing Willow Creek in white silence. "I received a letter from the medical college in Denver today," Delilah said, setting aside her book. "They've invited me to lecture in the spring on frontier medicine." Pierce looked up from the gun he was cleaning, a task that had become meditative for him. "That's quite an honor." "It is," she agreed, her expression thoughtful. "I'd be gone for 2 weeks." "Willow Creek can survive without its doctor for that long," Pierce said, though the thought of 2 weeks without Delilah made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. She smiled, seeing through his casual tone. Would you survive without me for that long? Pierce set the gun aside and moved to sit beside her on the sofa. I survived 33 years before meeting you, Dr. Reynolds. I imagine I could endure a fortnight. But would you want to? She pressed, her eyes holding his. The question hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the immediate context. Pierce took her hand, his thumb tracing the delicate bones of her wrist. No, he admitted quietly. I wouldn't want to, not anymore. Delilah's breath caught, and Pierce realized that despite the growth of their relationship, he had never explicitly told her how essential she had become to him. I love you, Delilah, he said, the words falling from his lips with surprising ease. I don't want to spend 2 weeks without you or any time at all if I can help it. Her eyes widened, a flush spreading across her cheeks. Pierce, you don't have to say anything, he hastened to add. I just wanted you to know. Let me finish, she said, pressing a finger to his lips with a smile that made his heart race. I was going to say that I love you too, and that I was hoping you might accompany me to Denver. Relief and joy washed through him. Pierce caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. As your bodyguard, Dr. Reynolds, as my companion, she corrected, her eyes bright with emotion. My partner. The word held implications that made Pierce's pulse quicken. Are you asking me to escort you to Denver, or are you asking me something else entirely? Delilah's smile turned mischievous, a side of her he'd grown to cherish. Perhaps both. I hear Denver has some lovely jewelry shops. Pierce laughed, pulling her closer. Are you proposing to me, Doctor? Would you accept if I were? She challenged, her arms sliding around his neck. In a heartbeat, he murmured against her lips before kissing her with all the love and gratitude that had been building within him since that first day on her doorstep. When they parted, breathless and smiling, Delilah rested her forehead against his. Then consider it officially asked, Deputy Yates. And officially accepted, Pierce replied, sealing the promise with another kiss. Later, as the snow continued to fall outside and the fire burned low in the grate, Pierce held Delilah close, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, he had been a solitary hunter, moving from town to town with nothing but his guns and his reputation. Now he was a deputy, a respected member of a community, and soon to be a husband. What are you thinking? Delilah asked, her head resting on his shoulder. That I'm grateful for that bullet, Pierce admitted. Without it, I never would have found you. Delilah lifted her head to meet his gaze, her expression serious. It wasn't the bullet that brought us together, Pierce. It was your willingness, eventually, to accept help, to heal. Pierce thought of those first days, how stubbornly he had resisted her care, how determined he had been to face his battles alone. And he thought of her words that had changed everything. Then I'll wait till you're ready to heal. You're right, he acknowledged, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Thank you for waiting. Some things are worth waiting for, Delilah said simply, settling back against him. As the snow fell silently beyond the window, Pierce Yates held the future in his arms and knew, with absolute certainty, that he was finally, completely healed. Spring came to Willow Creek with a riot of wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. Pierce and Delilah were married in a simple ceremony in the town church, with Sheriff Wilson standing as Pierce's best man and Mrs. Abernathy, who had been like a mother to Delilah since her arrival in town, serving as matron of honor. The entire town turned out for the celebration, transforming the main street into an outdoor reception area, with tables laden with food and a makeshift dance floor in front of the saloon. Pierce, who had once avoided crowds and connections, found himself surrounded by people he now considered friends, accepting their good wishes with an ease that would have been unimaginable a year before. Never thought I'd see the day. Wilson remarked as they watched Delilah being twirled around the dance floor by old Mr. Peterson, her laughter carrying across the gathering. The infamous ghost, settling down in Willow Creek as a respectable deputy and husband. Pierce smiled, his eyes never leaving his bride. Life has a way of surprising you. That it does, the sheriff agreed, clapping him on the shoulder before moving off to rejoin the festivities. When Delilah finally returned to his side, her cheeks flushed with exertion and happiness, Pierce pulled her close, uncaring of the approving looks from the townspeople. "Happy, Mrs. Yates?" he asked, the new name still a wonder on his lips. "Deliriously," she confirmed, her eyes shining as she looked up at him. "And you, Deputy Yates, any regrets about turning in your bounty-hunting ways for a badge and a wife?" Pierce pretended to consider the question, earning himself a playful swat on the arm. "Not a one," he assured her, bending to kiss her amidst the cheers and good-natured whistles of their neighbors. Later that night, as they stood on the porch of what was now their home, Delilah's office downstairs, and their living quarters above, Pierce watched the last of their wedding guests make their way down the moonlit street. "What are you thinking?" Delilah asked, echoing the question that had become familiar between them. Pierce turned to his wife, still marveling that he could call her that. "I'm thinking that a year ago, I was hunting a fugitive across the territories, sleeping under the stars and answering to no one. If someone had told me then that I'd be standing here now, I would have laughed in their face." "And now," Delilah prompted, her expression soft in the lamplight. "Now," Pierce said, drawing her into his arms, "I can't imagine being anywhere else or with anyone else." Delilah's smile was radiant as she rose on tiptoe to kiss him. "Then welcome home, Pierce Yates, for good this time." As he carried his bride across the threshold of their shared life, Pierce knew he had finally found what he had been searching for all those years on the trail: not justice or redemption, but love, acceptance, and a place to belong. The wounded cowboy who had once refused her help had not only healed but had found, in that healing, the greatest gift of all: a future bright with possibility and rich with love. In the years that followed, Pierce and Delilah Yates became fixtures in Willow Creek. Pierce eventually succeeded Wilson as sheriff when the older man retired, bringing to the position the same dedication and fairness that had earned him respect as a deputy. Delilah's reputation as a skilled physician spread throughout the territory, bringing patients from as far away as Santa Fe seeking her expertise. Their family grew with the birth of their son, Thomas, in the spring of 1878, followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Pierce's mother. The children thrived in Willow Creek, growing up surrounded by the extended family the town had become. Occasionally, Pierce's past would catch up to him in the form of an old bounty or a former adversary passing through town. But the man they sought, the lone hunter known as the Ghost, no longer existed. In his place stood Sheriff Yates, husband, father, and citizen, his old wounds healed by the love of a determined doctor who had refused to give up on him. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the same porch where they had first acknowledged their feelings, Delilah asked Pierce if he ever missed his old life. "Not the loneliness," he answered honestly. "Not the constant moving or the danger." He looked out at the peaceful street where their children were playing with friends under the watchful eye of Mrs. Abernathy. "But sometimes I miss the open country, the freedom of the trail." Delilah nodded, understanding as she always did. "Perhaps we should take the children camping this summer. Show them some of that country you love." Pierce smiled, once again amazed by this woman who knew him better than he knew himself. "I'd like that." "Then it's settled," she declared in that decisive way of hers that had first caught his attention all those years ago. As twilight settled over Willow Creek, Pierce Yates looked at the life he had built from the ashes of his solitary existence and felt a contentment that ran bone deep. He had come to this town wounded in body and spirit, determined to refuse help and continue his lonely path. Instead, he had found healing, purpose, and love in the arms of a woman who had seen his worth when he himself had forgotten it, a woman who had simply waited until he was ready to heal. And in that healing, Pierce Yates had found not just a reprieve from his wounds, but a life richer and more fulfilling than any he could have imagined for himself. It was, he reflected as he drew his wife close under the starlit Texas sky, the most unexpected and precious bounty of all.